There'd have been no pilot error if there'd been no engine failure in the first place, an obvious fact obscured by loading the blame on the pilots.
The engine was less than 3 months old. It had very little time in service, and yet there was a major disruption within that engine, an engine that should have been tested, designed and certified to a very high standard, and really permitted that engine and aircraft to be flying perhaps in 20-25 years' time.
Boeing's new 737 was bigger than its predecessor. It was going to need a larger engine. There was a good market for whoever could supply it. The CFN-56 series had powered the old plane. A simple upgrade seemed all that was necessary to increase the thrust of the engine.
The only way to increase the thrust of an engine is to increase the speed at which it rotates. And to get an increase of thrust of, shall we say, 6%, 7%, you only need to increase the speed by 2 or 3%. So it's quite a small change.
GEC made the original engine. They, with the French firm Snecma, were the obvious choice to upgrade it. As it needed so small an extra percentage of speed, the manufacturers didn't consider it necessary to spend time and money testing it in the air. Running it on a factory test bed would, they believed, adequately simulate the stresses of increased speed.
And that gave them the higher speeds that they wanted, but it didn't give them the same operating condition for the fan.
Failure to test the engine at altitude was fatal. An aerodynamic phenomenon called flutter stresses the fan blades. Flutter can't be accurately predicted.
The problem is that nobody properly understands flutter. The aerodynamic cause of the flutter is not properly understood. And there are possible mechanisms or causes of flutter which are not really understood at all.
The combination of speed, temperature and altitude resulted in catastrophic flutter, conditions the makers had never tested.
Well, what they should have done, and this is widely recognized, I'm sure, by the manufacturers as well as by other people, is they should have either tested it on an aircraft at the full range of conditions, or they should have tested it in a facility which simulated high altitude.
6 months after the Kegworth crash, 2 more 737s suffered identical engine failure. There was clearly a fatal design flaw in the engine.
I'm told that they no longer even consider building that type of engine. It's been completely redesigned. The fact is that if it had been redesigned in the first place, it may well not have had this problem.
The official report recommends that all new engines be tested at altitude. But like recommendations on vibration gauges and simulator training, the Civil Aviation Authority has reserved its position. The CAA has a duty to protect the travelling public. But it has another duty to regulate and protect the interests of commercial aviation. Kegworth survivors worry if both duties can be comfortably upheld. 4 years before Kegworth, an engine fire on the runway at Manchester caused the death of 55 people on a charter plane. The pilot hadn't been able to see which engine was burning.
After the Manchester fire disaster, one of the recommendations of the CAA was that tail cameras should be fitted to the aircraft. If the CAA's recommendation had been acted on, our plane would not have crashed because the captain would have been able to see which engine was faulty.
The CAA had received advice about external cameras in the 70s, then after Manchester, now after Kegworth. None will be fitted for years.
So they're still making the same recommendations in spite of all the pain, the suffering, the deaths. It seems a bit of a waste.
The motorway crash at Kegworth wrecked the lives of scores of families. Simply to blame the pilots means there may be 2 more casualties. The truth and the safety of passengers on future flights.
I liked to think while I was lying in a hospital bed for months that at least, okay, wow, I'm lucky. Gosh, it's unfortunate for all those other people, but at least something, this can never happen again. And I've been very disappointed. Initially, for the first year, I was disappointed that nothing seemed to happen very quickly. Now, more than 2 years later, I'm frankly very annoyed that I just have the impression nothing is going to happen. It will go away with time.
The industry have used the pilots as a scapegoat. They've made it out that the 2 pilots we had were somehow dud pilots, but the fact of the matter is they were not dud pilots, they were quite experienced line pilots, and I feel that the two other pilots in the same circumstances could well have reacted similarly.
Any pilot's performance is a product of the training that he's had and the equipment that you give him to operate. And if you give him training that doesn't equip him to deal with a situation, then are you going to call it pilot error if he gets it wrong when that situation crops up? And equally, if you give him equipment which isn't as easy to use as it could have been, are you going to blame the pilot who maybe gets it wrong when he hasn't got very long time to sort it out?
Pilot error is a very neat term. Really what they're saying is the last two people to touch the aircraft were at fault, and the last two people to touch it were the pilots. The people that designed it, the people that manufactured it, the people that certified it, they got it all right, but the two chaps that sat at the front end, they were the last to touch it, they got it wrong. So it straight away brushes really all the problems below the mat.
Everybody's forgotten a lot of things, except maybe David and myself. We are the easy option. The cheap option, if you wish. Just to bury the facts about other odds and ends and leave it as what is now known as pilot error.